And we're very excited today to have Rachael Taylor here with us. Rachael is an author of many kinds. She just told me, in fact, she actually started Watch Pro magazine, which is very exciting. And I've read the book. It looks like this. It's excellent, a great introduction overview to the company, because it's about what Rolex do and have done, as in the subtitle, the story behind the style. It's very thorough. It talks a lot about Rolex's points of differentiation, which is something I really like to look at when I think about watch brands, and I really enjoy talking about as well, as many of you will know. And it also had quite a few facts in it that I either didn't know or had forgotten. So I was very pleased about that. So we'll get started, and I'll ask the first few questions, and then I'll open it up for anyone else who'd like to ask a question. So I think first, Rachael, welcome, and I'd like to ask you what made you write the book, and how you got started on that.
This is going to be a really disappointing first question for you because I didn't actually choose it. It was my publisher who chose it. So I would love to make out that I'd sort of devised this whole thing, but we kind of been starting this series. So the year before I did two books in the series. So one was on Cartier, one was on Tiffany. And they were thinking about another brand that they wanted to feature. And I think at the moment with the series, because they're aimed at general readers, the idea is to pick sort of like the biggest, most famous brands. And they kind of asked me, they said, what do you think about Rolex? And I was like, yeah, I think that's definitely a brand that people are going to heard of and they wanted to do. So they just asked if I would do it. And to be honest, I wasn't so sure. Yeah. Back when I was a watch journalist, I'm gonna say it wasn't my favorite brand, which I know is probably a crazy thing to say in present company. Um, but yeah, I thought it was going to be a bit boring, to be honest. And then I surprised myself because actually, I think like you, there's loads I either didn't know or I'd forgotten, or just things that sometimes when you know facts about a brand, but you don't really think about them. You kind of know it's there, it's sort of in the locker, you don't really think about it. But then when you start to actually unpick these stories and look back at them, it's like incredible tales. So yeah, so it was really good fun in the end.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that this brand is actually underappreciated for how much it has done over the last 100 years,
Yeah.
115 years.
Well, it's become a status symbol, hasn't it? And I think for a lot of people, that's it. It's just a status symbol. And I think, and maybe I'd sort of fallen into that trap as well. And that you kind of forget sort of the real levels of innovation that have been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And marketing genius as well, which we might be able to come on
Mm,
to later.
yeah.
So talk us talk to us about how you went about it then, because the book has, it's the story behind the style, and you've very much focused on a lot of what they did to create the style they've got, and a lot of and it's a very broad overview of the brand. So talk us through how you went about this project.
So I suppose like the first thing I did was I kind of like sat down and sort of reevaluated the brand sort of with a real kind of purposeful focus. So I looked at what makes the brand really.
Hmm.
So like there's one section in the book that's kind of a guide to like different models. So that's kind of an obvious place to go. Sort of what are the models they do? What do people like about them? What makes them interesting? So that's sort of one section. And then the other part was really to kind of almost go through it in quite a chronological way. So to start with the story of how the brand was founded and to look at that from a real kind of historical point of view and almost quite a human point of view as well.
Hmm.
Because I think as well with Rolex, again, it's easy when it's this massive, giant global brand that everybody wants from there. It's easy to forget there was like one guy, or
Yeah.
two guys really, that started it. So I wanted to look at the human side of that and actually bring that back because I think that's something in contemporary marketing around Rolex that can sometimes get lost. So yeah, I wanted to do that story. And then I just had this idea, and maybe this is because I suppose I'm sort of writing for this book for people who maybe have an interest in watches, but also for people who are right at the start of their journey, or also
Hmm.
maybe people who just like luxury or I don't know, like branding or like fashion. Um, and so I started to think really about those sort of important moments in history, which kind of led me down quite an interesting way. So whether that was innovations, or whether that was just looking at, I had this idea for a chapter where I could pinpoint all the really sort of famous points in history that Rolex was at. So it could be, like the Everest climb, or, record breaking, like first flights, things like that. And actually, it's quite amazing when you start to pin Rolex to these, not watch events, not necessarily just sporting events, but these massive kind of historical world events. It's amazing how many you can like pin the watches to. And I just thought it was so fascinating that they were doing that. They wanted to test these watches in the wild, and they wanted to test them in real situations. And they were kind of going at it from that perspective, along with some excellent marketing, of course. But just from like a general knowledge point of view, it was so interesting to be able to go back through that. And yeah, I suppose I kind of applied that later on as well, just thinking about who are the most famous people who wore it, where did it pop up, and when you start to try and pinpoint those things, I think each one sort of takes on a little life of its own, and it's its own little story. And some are stories that we all know really well. Others are things that, were surprising to me. And from speaking to people who've read the book as well, there's a few little things that people didn't know, or as you say, maybe knew but forgot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had the same journey with everything I've learned about Rolex in the last few years, that they were so clever at associating themselves with certain events, and then also taking the risk, as you said, to try and get their watches tested. And many other firms did the same, so it wasn't unusual. But Rolex's ability to kind of make the most of their successes
Yeah.
also uncanny. I mean, I would, at some point, I should do a talk myself just called, why Hans Wilsdorf was the greatest marketer of the 20th century.
I would watch that.
Because just as much as his technical vision and his drive, which we see in the watches we still have today, like the Datejust and the day date especially, that he brought, he really saw as the pinnacle of his career. His marketing ideas and the way he pushed them through were equally as remarkable. Now, what you've done in the book is quite a lot of focus on the design of the watches. You've got quite a lot of information of the modern technical specs of the watches, but more about sort of the bracelets and what Rolex do currently that's quite unusual, which, things like their own steels and their manufacturing everything themselves. You didn't focus so much on the movement technology. So can you talk a bit about why you chose to write it that way?
I think, yeah, we were having a little chat about this earlier, and I suddenly, when you asked me that question, I had a little panic. I was like, God, should I've done more on the movements? Maybe that's something people would have liked. But it was quite a conscious decision at the time not to go down that. I think from having been a watch journalist for many years and kind of getting deep in those technical sheets that come with every watch, it's really hard to sort of take that and put that in a really concise, because the book's quite short, each section is quite short. It's supposed to be an introduction and sort of overview of the different aspects of the brand. But to be able to take sort of like the quite technical information about a movement, to make it snappy and make it interesting for a reader, and something that somebody who knows nothing about watches could read, pick up, and understand, is quite difficult. There's loads of great books out there that really go in depth with the technical side, and with movements, and there's lots of information out there. But for me, I just thought, could somebody pick it up and understand? Could I easily explain the difference between two movements? And often, it's so technical, that it's quite difficult to do. And what I didn't want to do, and what I personally dislike sometimes when people are writing about watches, is when it does get too technical, and do you know what I mean? You've really got to kind of like really want to know the answer to kind of get through that. And I just didn't feel like this book was necessarily the right place for it. Like, as you say, it's about the history, it's about the style, it's about, almost like a guide to things that you might want to know if you're going to start on your journey. It's not a super technical tome. So maybe while I should have done more on that, actually I didn't. I'm gonna stand by that.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think it's very hard to do. It's very hard to get the tone right of that kind of information. Because as I said, one of the things I'd completely forgotten that is in the book that I always forget is that oh, it's gone out of my head now. The watch that you can set the calendar by turning the bezel. The model name's completely gone out of my head, so someone can remind me in the chat. But I completely, yes, that's right, the Sky Dweller. Thank you. So yeah, the Sky Dweller, that's an amazing and extremely rare technical achievement. But again, very few people even remember that it's in the Rolex range right now. And so going into a lot of detail about how they did that is it's probably not of great interest to too many people. So
I think the fact that it is a first, almost like that's why I think it's interesting. If you can say this is interesting because it was a first, or it is the only one that can do it, or it is, super rare, super difficult. I think when you start to go deeper than that, like, why is that so rare? Like, why is that so difficult to do? Then you're kind of getting into, what I mean, big long chapters of trying to explain about why tiny little, I don't know, springs and screws and everything. It gets really, quite technical, quite fast.
Yeah, I agree. So my final question, and then we'll open it up to see what other people would like to ask you, is do you think that Rolex deserve their reputation?
Yes. Had you asked me that before I wrote this book, I would have said no, because I used to personally think, and David, please close your ears, but I used to think it was a bit of a boring choice. I used to kind of think it was the watch that people who didn't really know much about watches would choose. And then I was always really surprised by the fact that lots of people who I knew who did know lots and lots and lots about watches still wanted Rolexes in their collection. And for me, I could never quite link up the two. And I used to go out to Basel World every year, which is now defunct, but and the one appointment I really didn't look forward to was Rolex, because you'd be wandering around for an hour and they'd be like, oh, there's a slightly different blue dial, and I'd be like, oh god, like it was never as exciting as, I don't know, going to like Rado and they've got some brand new type of ceramic that nobody's ever used before. Like Rolex never really had these, in my opinion, these kind of really exciting innovations. It was always just slight tweaks that everyone would lose their mind over, and I couldn't quite understand what the fuss was about. But then in writing this, I realized that was because actually a lot of those innovations have already happened and were like hugely seismic at the time and really like very innovative. And I think by the time I got to watch reporting, it was kind of a period where they were sort of building on all these things. They weren't necessarily doing anything brand new. And I think that's given me a whole level of appreciation, and also just, I think the level of, and this is probably why I talk too much about this in the book, but the whole like craftsmanship and like what they're doing, the fact they're really on this crazy mission to be able to do absolutely everything themselves in-house, like mixing up their own gold alloys, like everything like that. They don't need to do these things, but they want to do them because they want to be the best, and they want to invest all this kind of crazy time and energy and money and get these amazing people in to be able to do these things and to do them the best themselves. And I find that, I mean, I'm a real lover of craft, and I think for me, I think that's super fascinating. And I think they do deserve their reputation. I think it's difficult because if you don't kind of know that side of it, I think you can just assume that Rolex is a flashy and Rolex is a luxury watch, and that's what it is. But actually, they've kind of got the kudos to back it up. So I would say they do deserve their reputation. They can have all the waiting lists they like, I think.
Yeah, my favorite crazily expensive thing that they do that almost no one else does is they actually water pressure test every finished watch.
Yeah.
Every single one, including all the gem set ones and everything like that. So that almost no one else can do that. It just doesn't make any sense. Most people would do a selection, they take a sample and test those and trust that the design will do the work for them. But Rolex actually test every single one before it leaves the facility, including the crazy gem set ones. They put them underwater and put them under pressure. So it's another great example of how much further they go than other people to justify their quality. Okay, well, I don't know if people want to put their hands up. It depends how many questions we've got, but if anybody else would like to jump in with a question, then please do. And if don't anyone fear. I have plenty more questions to ask, but this is supposed to be an opportunity for everyone. So if anyone has anything to ask, please go for it.
I have a question.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah. Hi. So with all the material and everything that's been sort of said and written about the brand, how hard or easy was it for you to focus on this specific path for the book, or like how hard was it for you to actually find something new that sort of wasn't covered in the other publications?
I think really easy, to be honest. I think there's so much. I mean, as you guys will know, there's so much information out there about watches. You know, the brand itself puts out incredible information. There's loads of things to read, loads of things to watch. You know, there's so much out there. I think for me, it was almost kind of like, what do you do with all that information? I think it's kind of like what we're talking about with the movements. You know, there's so much. Like, how do you choose what to take, and like how do you take that into kind of like quite a small format and a readable way? And I suppose without crossing over, I suppose maybe I've kind of always seen it as a weakness. I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm not a big watch collector. I'm not a big watch geek. I've kind of been around lots of people. I've done my fair share of writing about it, and I've kind of been in that world. But I've always sort of felt like an outsider, which felt like a bit of I suppose, a flaw for a long time. But I suppose with this, actually, because I wanted to write a book about an amazing watch brand for people who don't necessarily know about watch brands, actually it's a bit of a strength, because for me I was just like, well, what do I find interesting about it? And it's not necessarily the same thing that like Hodinkee is going to find super interesting, because, you know, they are like deep in there and they're, you know, they've done all these stories a million times. So what I was sort of finding interesting, and I think that sort of helps as well, that it was a brand maybe I wasn't that keen to write about as well, because I had to look at it totally with fresh eyes. I wasn't already in love with Rolex when I went to write this book. You know, I didn't have like the staid narratives. I didn't have like, you know, the things that I think are the best. I was kind of almost, even though I've sort of been around it for years and years, on the periphery, coming at it fresh. So it was kind of like getting all that research, but then also, I don't know, just looking at it with a bit of fresh eyes and kind of thinking as an external, like outside the watch world, like what is interesting in general about this brand, what's exciting. So yeah, don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that there is a lot of like very specialized sort of literature. It's
yeah.
good. So is this book actually something that you would give to someone, a friend who sort of, if they want to try to understand someone's passion for watches, or particularly the Rolex brand?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's sort of I think it's a real, I kind of wanted to write it in a way that hopefully people who like watches will enjoy it. But I also very much wanted to write it in a way that if you knew nothing about it, you could still pick it up and enjoy it and still find those stories engaging. So yeah, I definitely would. But do you have somebody that you need to explain your passion to? Is this a strategic gift?
All the time. Thank you.
I've not related but follow-up question. What do you think is the next first for Rolex? Do you think it'll be a breakthrough in materials or something to do with movements?
I don't know. I mean, Hamish, you were saying they've just done some massive upgrades to their movements, haven't they?
Well, the last movement family upgrade,
mm,
they claim that they'd upgraded 99% of the parts. We've just seen them reintroduce titanium
yeah.
and a whole new range of watches in the 1908. But we could quickly throw that question out to the whole group, actually. Does anyone have a strong feeling about what Rolex might do next that they'd like to share?
I mention it because I think it will be something to do with materials. So
In
I
what
think
way? Which kind of materials?
I don't know whether it'll be making something harder or lighter or less tarnishable. So it could be harder gold or a harder gold alloy, or a because I guess there's been this sort of trend towards making watches and everything actually just more practical for day-to-day use, and yellow gold not very practical for day-to-day wear. But if they find a way of mixing more, I don't know, copper into it or whatever it might be to make it a bit harder, I wonder if that will be a sort of next first for them, another way for them to justify another 15% of price increases on the precious metal watches they're trying to push everybody towards.
Yeah, but it does feel like they're getting a bit experimental, doesn't it? Like with titanium and with that thing. But I suppose that comes with they've kind of had this huge period of investment and setting up all their own facilities. And actually, if you're going to invest in that, once you've kind of done the one thing that you've done, obviously there's going to be a next thing, isn't there? And if they've kind of created this whole division to look at just materials and how that works, that makes total sense. That actually they would need to come up with something new. And I don't know. I think last year, Watches and Wonders, it felt very much like there was this kind of new spirit of experimentation, and it felt quite exciting and almost like they felt like they were bound. I found it quite a surprising presentation from Rolex. They had all the crazy color going on, they had the quirky motifs, they had the new materials, they had this brand new range of dress watches. It felt like, I'm kind of talking about going to Basel like 10-15 years ago and feeling like nothing ever changed from year to year in my opinion, just visually. But this time, you kind of walk past the stand, you could see people crowded around it, and I was like, what the hell is it? What's going on? It was quite exciting. It felt quite playful and daring. So yeah, so maybe we'll see more of that coming up.
Yeah, interesting.
I think the limited edition dial that's been leaked this week, I don't know if it's been actually formally announced today, but the special dial for the Vienna Philharmonic is another good example of exactly what you're talking about. So bringing something more dynamic and playful with their color and their craftsmanship, because I think it might be an enamel dial. Somebody can Google me and let me know.
It's enameled, and the pattern is it's a variety of musical instruments, but all set in tones of green.
Yeah,
so it's a wearable but utterly like silly watch, which they seem to be, like you say, getting a bit playful with, like that emoji watch that they made, or the one with the celebration dial with all the colourful bubbles. That's not Rolex of 5 years ago. That's a confident brand with sort of nothing to lose, really.
Yeah.
It's also fascinating, and my mind always goes to this, as many of you will know, that for Rolex to step into what is essentially the limited edition watch market at this stage, just as the rest of the market seems saturated by them, is fascinating, because it'll work for Rolex. to be frank, the Rolex is, yes, it makes nearly 1 million watches a year, but its collectors love the rare watches just as collectors love rare watches of all kinds. But to then say they're going to make regular new rare dials is really exciting again, and they have periods of doing that in the past. So for all that the stone dials of Rolex past and the stellar dials as they're known, which are a very special and rare type of colored Rolex dial that are not made of semi-precious stones, but are made differently, but they're still very lurid colors, and they're very famous from the 80s, I think. So Rolex have done interesting dials in the past, and so to bring that back, as you said, Rachel, brings a lot of excitement back to the brand, even if the underlying Oyster date just is now a 60-year-old watch? No, 80-year-old watch. 80-year-old watch. Right, any questions from anyone else?
Can I ask a follow-up one before?
Of course, yeah.
It's a really long time since Rolex have made a rectangular or non-round watch. Why do you think that is, and do you think there's a place in Rolex's future for a non-round watch?
I would imagine they don't sell. I would imagine if they did, they would probably make more of them. But then, yeah, I don't know. I can't see it, to be honest. Other brands have kind of got the market on that as well. I think it'd be a radical move. This is what I love about Rolex. We're talking about a change of taste here, and that's a radical move. But you know, it is for Rolex. Other brands will do loads of different shapes, cases, whatever. But that, I think that would feel very radical. I would say you're probably more on the money with the whole materials innovation, rather than like a complete redo of that. I don't know. Why would you like to see that?
Not necessarily. I'm just, for brands that sort of feels like it, whatever it does at the moment, people, if it's slightly controversial, might have 6 months of it being controversial and then fall in love with it. It sort of feels like it's a time for them to kind of release whatever they fancy and see what sticks. They've been very good at releasing models, keeping them out for 5 years, and then canning them when they don't sell. And to your point about other brands sort of cornering the square watch market, it was Cartier and JLC.
Yeah.
Sure, they have, but they also both have a really broad suite of different shaped watches. And for me, it's always just been a surprise that Rolexes are not that they're not that different from one another. Between the range of watches, they're all round. They've all got pretty chunky lugs. They're in 4 sizes. Sports watches are in 2 sizes. I don't know. It feels like they, as they're sort of gearing up with the 1908 range to do something totally different. I wonder if they'll do something totally different in 5 years.
Maybe in the dress, yeah, maybe in that line. I could more see it in that line. You're right. Maybe that could be something. Yeah, but they are. I mean, try writing a book about it when every single watch has the same name, apart from the last word. Is that repetition makes you realize exactly how similar they all are. And I don't know if that says something about us as humans, the fact the most popular watch brand in the world, the whole collection is pretty much the same. But yeah, maybe in the dress line it could be something interesting.
I'm here.
I'm always tickled by the fact that people complain about it, because I think it's core to their success.
Clearly has been, yeah.
I think it's absolutely core that the watch doesn't change. And that my reasoning is simple, that if I decide I want a Submariner and I can't afford one today, and I work hard and I save up for 10 years, I want the watch to be the same in 10 years when I buy it. And Rolex's promise is the same. It's just technically better. We'll improve each family of watches will improve on average every 10 years, which is what they do. And that's what they've done. And it actually, across the range, yes, they're all round, but as I'd said, they're all kind of chunky at the moment. But the new one, 1908, is deliberately very slim and slender, and they've made a huge point of not including it in the oyster case, even though it looks really like an oyster case in shape. It's not an oyster case, because it's thinner, basically. And yeah, it's I think it's part of their magic. It's part of their magic that the watches are very similar decade after decade. And other brands like Cartier, who are arguably almost as successful when you're looking back across the history, have done the same thing. So they've taken a shape of watch and made it in like, if you take the tank, you can buy a tank in every different conceivable size, but it's the same watch, right? Yeah, nothing else has changed about the design, but you can get every millimeter, whatever size you want, you can find over the decades. So Rolex are a bit the same. You can go from a 30 mil Rolex all the way to a 45 now, and there's something for you. Okay, cool. Any questions sprung to anyone else's mind?
See, there's a question in the comments.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
I'll give way to the question.
No, you go.
I think Hamish has just answered it, but I'll ask it again anyway because I wrote it down before we started. And it's on that. I've only been into the hobby for kind of 4 or 5 short years, and obviously watches and wonders come around. Obviously, formerly Baselworld every time, and you can have. I mean, it must drive other watch brands mad because they release brand new watches, brand new product lines, and yet Rolex reduce the case by a couple of mil and introduce a single new colorway, and everybody on the internet absolutely loses it. And there's videos and people, hypothesizing of what this means going forward and will it flop, or some people are really angry and some people are really happy. And is this all marketing genius? I assume this is all intentional. I think Hamish answered it to a certain extent, but what's your take on it, Rachel?
I think at some point the fans have taken over. It's like if you look, I don't know, if you sat down and you wrote a marketing strategy today, and you were kind of like, I've got this amazing idea, I'm going to slightly change the case size, everybody's going to lose their mind. That wouldn't work. If you were trying to make that thing, that wouldn't happen. So I think at some point it's like fan power. Rolex are great communicators. All their materials are always great. They could do a good job of it. They sponsor flipping everything. But I don't feel like they don't do a particularly hard sell. I think a lot of this excitement, a lot of this kind of like fever is from the collectors. It's from within the community. So I don't know so much. Like, it's almost like, if you were to imagine that a brand is just sort of, as we've just been discussing, sort of stayed the same for like decades and hardly changed, you would imagine that they would kind of be forgotten about, but almost the opposite has happened. But yeah, I can imagine it does absolutely drive the other brands insane. The kind of money they're putting into research and development, celebrity endorsement, to launching it, to making a fanfare about it. And Rolex actually don't even need to do anything. They could have a zero marketing budget. They could just slyly release one at some shop in the world somewhere they don't tell anyone about, but everyone would find out about it. So that's like a people power thing. I don't know how much marketing genius that is. I think they're in a nice position now where they can just do that and not have to worry about that.
If they discontinue a watch, everyone goes mad for it.
Yeah, they can't do anything without everybody losing it.
They could stop doing something and generate more hype than other people doing something.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
It's not like, I don't know if there's another brand out there, outside of watch or whatever. It's a crazy level of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, I should point out that Rolex are well known for counter-cyclically spending on marketing and advertising. So what that means is historically when times get tough and other watch companies pull back on their advertising, Rolex very deliberately try and spend a lot more. And that helps build that fandom and that customer base and that strength in the market. And let's all be honest, like Rolex is up there. There's basically Rolex and Apple are the top two brands in terms of global name recognition, which is incredible for a product that almost no one on earth can really afford. When the starting price is a significant percentage of the annual average wage in the majority of countries in the world, it's amazing that they have such a big brand. It's a popular brand. Yeah,
I'd be interested to know, because obviously with kind of all the sort of, I don't know, uproar about waiting lists and people not being able to get certain watches and all this sort of stuff, and kind of the rise of the like independent watch brands. There's kind of not necessarily like your Tags or your Cartiers kind of competing in that space, but the kind of real sort of niche independent brands. There seems to be like a real kind of growing interest in that, which is what I hear from retailers all the time. But do you guys think that, would Rolex ever be at risk of that kind of different level of innovation, taking over, or are they absolutely going to be rock solid and fine forever?
Anyone want to comment on that?
I know I'm not supposed to be asking the questions, but
no, we're here. It's a discussion.
I think they are getting pretty close to a time in their development where they could make some big old mistakes, particularly around pricing. So the pricing of the gold sports models now is really touching on, high-end independent watchmaking, low production, handmade watches territory. And I think for the sort of person that buys, the solid gold Daytona, that could be a watch that slips off their wants list before too long, particularly at new prices. So we have a friend member actually who bought a white gold Daytona at list price, and he sold it a year later to buy something that he quote unquote referred to as much more interesting and enjoyable to own and wear. And I think they're sort of pushing their pricing to a point now where there is a lot, particularly for the gold watches, less so for the steel watches, and less so again for the Datejusts. But I think they are there's too much choice. They're pushing themselves into an area where there's too much choice, and arguably some of the choices are better, whatever that means.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's kind of yeah, I suppose when brands kind of sit back and think they do have that full control, I think that's always a bit of a dangerous moment. And in reality, you know, they've survived for so long and been covered for so long, that's probably not going to change. But there does seem to be this wave of interest in these watches, which you can get now. You don't have to wait for. And, you know, as a talking point goes, it is a lot more interesting. So yeah, I think it's an interesting area.
And I guess also just developing that a bit further, I think that you probably, I'm going to talk myself out of my point now. I'm guessing if you did a survey or found out the type of person that brought those sort of the really expensive gold Rolexes, I would bet that probably 30% of them are watch collectors and 70% of them are wealthy individuals who have got lots of money to spend on shiny things, and they've just chosen this year or this month that it's a solid gold diamond covered Rolex, and they're probably not actually in the market for a FP Journe or a Lange or whatever it might be that competes with it, because they want something that is, you know, a 70 grand gold Rolex is still a Rolex sports model. You know, you can still take it everywhere. It will still be very fixable. It's still completely robust, and you know, many other watches aren't.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think then it's kind of, yeah, serious collectors are more likely to be swayed to the independent brands, you know, because they know what they're looking for. They know it's interesting. I think that's it's a good point about the 70% of people just want shiny things. I think must be a huge bulk of Rolex's business, you know. But I suppose like now, you know, obviously watches are, you know, like celebrities are talking more about watch ownership, and not just being an ambassador, but actually, you know, personal collections and things like that. And I suppose if you know, like there's a section in my book that sort of talks about kind of like references to Rolex and like hip hop and music lyrics. And increasingly you hear really kind of quite rogue watch references coming in. And then if that continues, you know, I suppose then suddenly do these really niche brands, they become like really covetable. But then the problem is, you know, when there's 5 a year, you're kind of in the same problem where like majority of people can't afford a Rolex, but also even maybe people who can't necessarily get a hold of these kind of really unique watches. And I think for a lot of people, outside of really passionate collectors, there's always this fear of the sell on, you know. I think I get asked this question all the time, like, oh, what should I buy if I want it to hold its value, or I want it to be an investment? And in reality, you know, it's like Rolex and Patek, you know, guaranteed, unless you are sort of really quite savvy about it. If you don't know anything about it, that's what you should buy. So will those kind of, I don't know, more mainstream people understand what they're buying to kind of follow suit? I don't know that they'd have the confidence to do that, because people who don't buy watch for the love of watches, but buy it as an investment or a luxury piece, they want some sort of reassurance that if they need to sell it, they can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I see Vrata, I think Guess has a question or a comment.
Yeah, just a comment. I think two biggest challenges for Rolex for like the next generation is probably keeping this sort of sexy status for the people who are now sort of growing up, who's now, you know, I don't know, if you're 15 years old, you know, like how do I appeal to you that you're gonna want this product when you get that first big bonus? Or and then because the market is pushing sort of this, the demand is pushing the brands, especially Rolex, to create more product than to keep up the technological sort of, you know, superiority and quality even in the bigger production, because it really isn't just, you know, you probably can't just up your production by 10% and expect that the quality is going to be the same. There's probably quite a lot of investment and a lot of know-how how to even grow something like that. And is it even, achievable and sustainable?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point about kind of that expansion. But I feel like maybe if they're in, because Rolex are in the position that they are, I don't imagine they would, because they have such rigorous testing. I can't see them kind of falling victim to that sort of, rapid expansion problem that a lot of brands might have, where it's not the right quality. I just don't see those watches as being able to get out. I mean, the real problem in watchmaking, not just for Rolex, is like who's the next generation in terms of who's going to be making the watches. There's like a real shortage of watchmakers. And Rolex and other brands have obviously been doing lots sort of behind the scenes to kind of, set up training places and apprenticeships and things like that to try and get more people in. But I think that's an interesting thing to think about. I suppose if you're suddenly going from X production to Y production, you need more people to be able to kind of produce at the same level. And that is going to take a bit of time, even if they've been sort of training people on the side and kind of, preparing for it. But yeah, I can't imagine, just because they don't need to, I think they don't need, they're already selling, they could sell all day long. They don't need to rush that production. I think people will wait. I think your idea of the next generation buying is an interesting one. And I think they're going to have to do a lot of work to kind of stay with that sort of like youth culture and pop culture. Because I think the next generation coming up has a real sort of rejection of like classic icons of wealth, which Rolex most definitely is. It's funny kind of reading sort of the data on sort of younger shoppers. They kind of secretly covet these luxury brands, but they don't want to be seen as wearing them. They don't want to be seen as like showing off that wealth. So, and it's really hard to wear a Rolex without shoving it in someone's face, as a luxury good. So I think that is something that is going to be interesting to see how they overcome that sort of with the next generation coming through. But I think it's probably the way they always have, I think it's going to be attaching it to pop culture figures and making sure that people in that age bracket are wearing it. So it's always going to have that sort of prestige. But it's interesting as sort of attitudes towards luxury change. And maybe this is the new sort of more understated dress watches coming through. Maybe that's a reaction to that. They're trying to have something that isn't like a big flashy Rolex in your face.
Albeit they're only making it in gold.
Yeah, but they would know that it could be gold plated, but a chunky Rolex is a chunky Rolex. But yeah.
I mean, totally. I mean, it is a different shape. I mean, absolutely, it's a different shape. Yeah. Great. Well, I had a couple more questions for you, Rachel, which was, I mean, the first one's pretty obvious, which is, do you own any Rolexes currently?
No, I do not.
And you've already said that you're not a watch person, so I'm guessing you don't collect them. But is there anything else you collect?
I love my jewelry. So yeah, I do. I do collect jewelry. Do I collect anything else? I don't know. I'm not a big collector, I'm not. I don't think I've got the right mindset for it. I just, I have an appreciation of nice things, but I'm not a particular collector. I think you've got to be a person, a certain, I don't know, attitude to be a collector, and I don't think I'm disciplined enough to be one. I think I'm interested in one thing one day and then off on something else the next.
No, I think there's a lot of watch collectors like that. That's why they end up with so many of them.
Okay, maybe I am at risk then. I should be careful.
Yeah, and jewelry collecting fascinates me. I think there's a whole enormous world of jewelry collectors out there who would be great to get to know and learn more about how they collect. But that's
someone really interestingly did a comparison recently. There's a girl who runs a website called The Eye of Jewelry, and she teamed up with a US watch, was it Watchbox or something in the US, and they did the series of videos where she was trying to explain jewelry to watch lovers by like linking certain jewelry designers to certain jewelry brands and being like, this is the whatever. I thought that was so fascinating to kind of to get inside that mindset and sort of make that link to, just so people who love watches could suddenly understand why people are so obsessed with it. A jewelry brand, like, this is the technical one, this is the creative one, this is the new talent. It was super cool.
Yeah, no, I'll look that up. We were lucky enough to do an event at the Bulgari Global Showcase here in London, and we got to see the high horology watches, but we also got to see the big jewelry, and it was really fascinating. And some jewelry watches, of course, from Bulgari. But I love exploring that, even though it's not something I'm ever going to be able to purchase or never mind wear. I love exploring that side of the watch industry. And I guess a question that is quite fun that we ask each other a lot is, even if you don't have any, do you have a current favorite Rolex?
Yeah, do you know, I was thinking about this, and I was looking at the sort of newer, like the models that have come out this year. But there's like a day date that came out this year that's got like a carnelian dial, so like the orange kind of, yeah, the gemstone dial. But yeah, I really like that. I think for me, I love the day date, just because if you're gonna have it, you should have it all, like.
Yeah.
Give me the full works. I love the gemstone dials. I think it's so cool. You kind of look back to sort of the ones they kind of did in the 70s, when that was sort of rife, and like other brands like Piaget and stuff were doing it. Was really cool. But yeah, I don't know. I love that. I think that's something a bit different. I could definitely get behind that. And obviously, like, also all the cool watches, like with the like the bubble dials and the like the puzzle emoji and stuff like that. I thought that was super cool as well. Yeah, I don't know. I'm in for the more playful ones. So yeah.
Yeah, and if anyone's watching who hasn't seen a modern, fully set Rolex dial, it really is a work of art. I mean, the stone setting, the tiny size of the stones, that they really are a fantastic piece of jewelry. On top of a great watch, of course. So yeah, the bringing out more colored stones again, and colored stone themed watches, I think it's really exciting. And it's one of the things I say a lot about Rolex, which I think is true, is Rolex gives the industry permission to do a lot of things. And so what have we seen from Omega? We've seen colored gemstones on some of the Omega Classic ranges, coming out. Now, how long they took to plan and all that, who knows? But Rolex allows some of the other huge brands that might not be jewelry brands to also start doing that sort of thing. And it's great. It gives more variety and more fun for everyone. So I always think it's worthwhile seeing what Rolex are doing on that side as well.
They do always, Rolex do always have something playful in their collection, don't they? Just going through, so I just put in the chat my favorite Rolex at the moment, which is very similar to yours, Rachel. It is 2 across in the configurator. So it's a day date with the diamond dial and the rainbow hour indices. And when you scroll through, like particularly the day date and the perpetual ranges, they've always got something hidden away that's either a ridiculous color or fun diamonds or colored stones, which is great.
Yeah, and these are not watches that we think everyone can easily afford, but by any means, these are very, very expensive watches and pieces of jewelry, but they're really fun to look at, and if you get to see them up close, they're always fun to examine and see how well they're made. Well, we'll sort of wrap it up there, unless I'll pause to see if anyone else has any further questions. If so, please shout. If not, I think my final question for you, Rachel, is, I know you mentioned earlier you've written about Cartier and Tiffany. Are there any other projects forthcoming we should keep an eye out for, or anything that you maybe really like to work on next of a similar vein?
Well, you didn't know this because I didn't tell you before, which is quite funny that you just mentioned it. But yeah, the next one, which I'm currently working on just now, is going to be on Bulgari.
Oh,
so yeah,
cool.
quite a nice link. Yeah, so I am currently in the depths of image research for that one at the minute, which I definitely was supposed to finish last week and I still haven't finished. Apologies to my editor. But yeah, so I think, yeah, so I'm working on that one at the moment. So it should be out probably, I would think, in October, I think. So yeah, that'll be the next one, that series.
Have you been to Bond Street? Yeah, it's a wonderful place to wander about and look at shiny things.
Yeah, I'm jealous of your event. That sounds amazing.
It was. We were really. It was a really great opportunity. Hopefully, we'll get to do it again later in the year when the showcase for 2024 comes through town. Yeah, maybe you'll be able to come along. But it was fantastic, and it was very good of them to have us, and all the people who came. It was just staggeringly fun to see what they do, because they do incredible, genuinely incredible, technically technical achievements in their watch range. And you know, the style's not for everyone, of course, but really worth getting your hands on some of their high horology pieces to see what they've done. So really enjoyed it. So yeah, I'll finish there. Thank you very much for your time, Rachel. It's been really
Thanks for
fun.
having me.
I'm sure everybody enjoyed themselves. And our next online event in February is going to be with a business school professor who's written a book on the industry. So we're going to talk about the ins and outs of the industry. So a bit different, and I don't quite know where that's going to go, but I'm excited about that. And then in March, our online event is about bullover with the world's leading bullover expert, who's an incredible story. His story is incredible, and he became the world's leading bullover heritage expert, and he built the museum that he then gave to the company. So that's February and March. And of course, we've got our in-person events in London. So with that, I'll say thanks very much again to Rachel, and good night, everybody.